name is Sylvie Hartwell. I'm 29 years old, and on the night my father announced he was handing the family bakery to my brother in front of 43 relatives, I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I sat very still at the long table in my grandmother's dining room, with my hands folded in my lap and a piece of pecan pie going cold in front of me. And I listened to my future being handed to someone else, like it was a minor administrative decision. My father stood at the head of the table and talked about legacy, about the Hartwell name, about how my brother had shown real initiative lately, real leadership potential, and how it was time for the next generation to step up and carry Hartwell's forward into whatever he called the future. He used the word stewardship twice. He clinked his glass. People applauded. Nobody looked at me. Not even my mother. She was already smiling at my brother across the table, the way she always smiled at him, like he was the only light source in the room worth orienting toward. I had been running the financial and operational back end of Hartwell's Bakery and Catering for 6 years. Not helping. Running. My brother had been posting aesthetic videos of himself frosting cakes. Before I tell you what happened after that dinner, I want to ask you something. If you found out that someone had been quietly holding up everything you loved, and you had let yourself believe it was just happening on its own, what would you do when they finally stopped? I think about that question a lot now. I think the answer most people give is different from what they actually do. By the time I got back to my apartment that night, I had already made the decision. I didn't know yet what it would cost any of us, but I knew with a clarity that felt almost physical that I was done operating in the background of a story where I didn't get to exist. Let me back up. Hartwell started as a small neighborhood bakery in Knoxville, Tennessee, the kind of place that smells like brown butter and cardamom and has a handwritten specials board that hasn't changed since 2003. My grandmother built it, my father inherited it. By the time I was 23 and fresh out of a hospitality management program, it had grown into a full catering operation with a commercial kitchen annex, 2 delivery vans, a wedding cake division, and a contract with 3 hotels downtown. It was also quietly hemorrhaging money because nobody in my family had ever learned the difference between revenue and profit. I fixed that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but methodically, the way you fix a leaking structure, find the hole, seal it, move to the next one, document everything so it doesn't open back up while you're sleeping. I renegotiated our flour and dairy contracts and saved us $11,000 in the first year. I brought our permitting current after my father had let 2 health certificates lapse because he kept forgetting to file. I built a catering quote system that finally accounted for labor hours correctly instead of just guessing at a number that felt right. When the city updated commercial kitchen ventilation codes, I handled the inspection, the modification paperwork, and the contractor bids. When our biggest hotel account nearly dropped us over a billing dispute, I drove to their offices and sat across from their events director and walked her through every invoice line by line until she agreed the error was on their end. My father's contribution to all of this was to tell people we had the best croissants in East Tennessee and occasionally show up on Saturdays to shake hands and accept compliments about the lemon tart. My brother's contribution was the Instagram following, which, fine, the aesthetic mattered. Customers found us because of his photos, but the customers who found us then had somewhere functional to land because of me. That's a distinction my family had never once made out loud. I want to be honest about something. I knew on some level that I was invisible. Families like mine have a way of making the competent one feel like competence is just a personality quirk, something you do because you enjoy it, not something that holds the whole structure together. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that once the business was stable, they'd see it. I told myself a lot of things in the dark at 11 at night while I was reconciling invoices my father had misrouted. Then came my grandmother's 80th birthday dinner, and my father stood up in her dining room and announced the future of Hartwell's like it wasn't sitting 12 feet away from him. When I got home that night, I called my best friend. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is one of the reasons she is still my best friend. When I finished, she asked one question. Does your name appear on anything official tied to that business? I laughed, and it wasn't a funny laugh. My name appeared on almost everything. The business checking account where I was listed as an authorized signatory because my father kept overdrafting when he wrote checks without checking the balance. The catering license renewal contact, the health permit correspondence, the hotel contract, primary contact, email, the vendor accounts I had set up under my professional email so the invoices would actually get opened and paid. The cloud accounting software subscription billed to my card. The commercial kitchen maintenance service scheduled through my calendar. I opened my laptop and started making a list. I titled the document Operational Inventory. It took me until 1 in the morning to complete. When I was done, I sat back and looked at it and felt something I can only describe as the walls of a very long-running illusion coming down. My brother was not stepping into a thriving business. He was stepping into a building whose electrical system I had quietly maintained, and nobody had thought to mention that to him. I gave myself the weekend to be angry, not because I thought anger deserved a schedule, but because I knew that if I acted while I was still in the rawer part of it, I would do something I couldn't stand behind. I went for long walks. I made soup. I reread the list 3 times. By Sunday evening, I was calm enough to be surgical. On Monday morning, I sent an email to my father, my brother, and the bakery's outside bookkeeper, a woman named Frances who had been trying to get my father to modernize his record-keeping for 9 years without success. The subject line was, Transition of Hartwell's Operational Accounts. I wrote that effective immediately, I would be stepping back from all unpaid administrative and operational functions connected to Hartwell's Bakery and Catering. I attached the full inventory document, organized by system, with current login contacts, renewal dates, and required actions noted for each item. I indicated that any account currently billed through my personal card would be removed within 7 business days, and any matter requiring my email address, signature, or professional access would need to be reassigned by ownership before that deadline. I did not mention the dinner. I did not say, you handed my work to someone who didn't do it in front of the family without warning. I just returned everything to its owners and described exactly what they were receiving. The first response came from my brother 11 minutes later, a voice memo. I didn't listen to it immediately. I could see from the preview that it started with my name in a tone I recognized, the one he used when he thought I was overcomplicating something he found inconvenient. My father called that afternoon. I let it go to voicemail. He said in the careful voice he reserved for moments when he knew he might have made an error, that he hoped I wasn't reading too much into the announcement, that it was about the front-of-house direction, the brand, the public identity of Hartwell's, that my role had always been important, that he hoped we could talk. I noticed he didn't say, I should have talked to you first. He didn't say, I didn't explain your contributions clearly. He said my role had always been important, past tense, wrapped in a present tense hope. My mother sent a text. It said, You're making this harder than it needs to be. Sometimes I think you do this on purpose. I screenshotted it and kept building the inventory. Over the next 4 days, I worked through the list the way I work through any operational problem, one item at a time, documented at every step. I removed my card from the accounting software subscription and sent the login transfer instructions to the bookkeeper. I downloaded the vendor contract archive and forwarded it to my father's email with a note indicating which contracts were up for renewal in the next 90 days. I updated the catering license contact email to redirect to the main bakery inbox. I forwarded the health permit correspondence chain to my brother with a note explaining the next inspection window and the documentation he would need to have ready. I transferred the hotel account contact over to a new email my father would need to monitor, and I sent the hotel's events director a professional note introducing the change. Each task took less than an hour. Each task had been invisible for years. On the 5th day, my father's sister called me. She had been at the birthday dinner. She was the one person in my family I had always trusted to be honest, even when honesty cost her something. She told me my father had forwarded my email to the extended family with a note calling it an overreaction to a misunderstanding, that he was saying I had taken a dinner announcement personally and was now threatening the business because I felt overlooked. Threatening. That was the word he used. I thanked her. I hung up. I added a section to my inventory document labeled Current Narrative Being Circulated, and then I kept going. The seventh day was a Tuesday. The call I had been expecting came at 8:43 in the morning from the hotel accounts events director, a woman I had worked with closely enough that she texted me directly rather than going through the main bakery number. She asked, without any warm-up, whether there had been a change in our accounting structure, because the quarterly invoice her office had just received had incorrect line items, a missing labor addendum, and an email address that was bouncing. I was standing in my kitchen in socks, halfway through a cup of coffee, and I looked out the window at the parking lot and took one slow breath before I answered. Yes, I said, there's been a transition in who manages that account. The new contact should be reachable through the main bakery number. I can send you the updated vendor summary I prepared if it would help. She paused. Then she said, Is everything okay over there? I told her things were in transition. She was too professional to push further, but I could hear in the pause after I said it that she already understood more than I had technically communicated. Within 2 hours, the call started. My father first. Then my brother. Then my father again from a different number. Then the bakery's front desk. By 10:30, I had 9 missed calls and a voicemail from my brother that I could summarize as, "Stop making a point and just fix the invoice." My mother sent another text. It said, "The hotel is upset. Whatever you did, undo it." Whatever I did. I had done nothing except stop doing everything. The invoice had been wrong because my brother had pulled the previous quarter's numbers without understanding how the labor addendum worked, and without understanding that the addendum existed because I had negotiated it into the contract 2 years ago to protect us from being undercharged during high-volume seasons. He hadn't known the addendum was there. Nobody had told him, because nobody had needed to tell anyone anything while I was just handling it. The hotel account was not the only thing unraveling. The health permit renewal, which I had flagged in my transition document as needing attention within 30 days, had not been acted on. The flour supplier had emailed twice about a contract extension I had been managing and received no response. The accounting software had sent an access lapse warning because nobody had accepted the ownership transfer I had initiated. One of the catering clients who had booked a corporate lunch for the following week emailed the main bakery address asking for a finalized menu confirmation that I had previously handled through a system my family didn't know existed. None of this was sabotage. I want to be clear about that because I knew even then that my father would use the word sabotage eventually, and I wanted to be clean enough in my own conscience that the accusation would be easy to disprove. Every account had been transferred. Every deadline had been documented. Every system had a handoff note attached. The only thing missing was someone to read it. On the 8th day, my father called and asked me to come to a family meeting at the bakery that Friday evening. He said, "We need to address this as a family." I knew what that meant. It meant he wanted the setting to do the persuading, the display cases, the warm light, the smell of the place, the implicit argument of, "Look at what we've built. Don't you want to be part of it?" I said I would come. My friend sat across from me that night while I decided what to bring. She said, "They think they're calling you back to tell the story their way." I nodded. I know that. I was bringing my own version. Friday evening, the bakery was closed and set up with folding chairs in the main room, which my mother had softened with extra table candles and a tray of pastries from that morning's production. About 20 people were there. My immediate family, my grandmother, several aunts and uncles, a few cousins who had apparently been briefed on the situation in terms I could already guess at. My father opened without greeting me first. He said, "We're here because there's been a misunderstanding that has affected the business, and we'd like to resolve it together as a family." He said misunderstanding again. I had been counting. My mother added that emotions had run high lately and that the important thing was keeping the business stable for everyone who depended on it, meaning the employees, the customers, the family name. I let them finish. Then I opened the folder I had brought and passed printed copies down both sides of the room. My grandmother took one. My aunt took one. My brother stared at his like it had personally offended him. This is a full accounting of the operational functions I have managed for Hartwell's without compensation for 6 years, I said. Each item includes dates, contacts, and documentation. Before we discuss what's happening now, I'd like the room to have accurate information. My father said, "That's not the issue we're here to discuss." "It is exactly the issue," I said, "because you described this week's situation as an overreaction to a misunderstanding. And I want everyone here to understand what was actually misunderstood." Then I laid it out. Not the way a daughter venting at a dinner table lays things out, but the way I would lay it out in a vendor dispute or a contract review, specific, dated, verifiable, the hotel contract addendum, and what it was worth in revenue protection, the health permits and the lapsed ones I had caught and renewed, the supplier renegotiations with the dollar figures attached, the accounting system overhaul that had taken me 4 months to implement and had cut our error rate in reconciliation by most of what it had been before, the catering quote system, the 6 weekends I had spent restructuring our insurance coverage after we added the commercial kitchen. People picked up the pages. My grandmother read slowly and didn't look up for a long time. My brother said, "You make it sound like you were doing this for free by choice." I looked at him. I said, "I was doing it for free because every time I raised the question of formal compensation or equity, I was told it was a family business and family doesn't charge family." He opened his mouth. "Did the hotel contract addendum charge family?" I asked. "Did the health permit renewal charge family? Because those were my professional hours, and the business benefited from them whether we gave them a rate or not." He closed his mouth. My father shifted to a different approach. He said, "We appreciate everything you've contributed, but the way you've handled this, pulling access, disrupting accounts, not responding to calls, that reflects poorly on your judgment. A person who cares about this business doesn't put it at risk." I looked around the room before I answered. My grandmother was still reading. My aunt had her hand flat on the table the way she does when she's keeping herself very still. Several cousins had stopped eating the pastries. "You announced at a family dinner that you are transferring ownership of a business I have spent 6 years running," I said. "You announced it without speaking to me first. You told 43 people the future of Hartwell's before you told me. And when I sent a professional transition document instead of having a breakdown, you called it sabotage and a threat. What I'd like to know is which part of that reflects poorly on whose judgment." The room was quiet. Not the polite quiet of people being respectful, the harder quiet of people recalculating. My mother said, "You always have to be right." My grandmother set down her packet. She said in the voice she uses when she has heard enough, "Theodore." She was looking at my father. She said, "Did you speak with Sylvie before that dinner?" My father said, "We'd been discussing the direction for a while." "Did you speak with Sylvie?" My grandmother said again. He didn't answer. That was its own answer. My grandmother looked at me and then back at my father and said, "You don't announce a person's future over birthday cake and then call it a misunderstanding when they respond." My father shifted to logistics, the way men in my family always shift to logistics when the emotional argument stops working. He said the hotel needed the invoice corrected, the permit renewal needed action, and there were clients waiting on confirmations. He said, "Whatever point you're making, you've made it. We need you to step back in." I reached into my folder one more time and handed a single page to my brother and then to my father. It was a 2-item document. At the top it said, "What I'm asking for." The first item was a formal acknowledgement, in front of the family currently present, that the operational and financial work I had done for Hartwell's over 6 years had been essential to the business's survival and growth. The second item was a meeting within 30 days to discuss either formal compensation for any future operational work or an equity arrangement reflecting my existing contribution, with a neutral third party present. "That's it," I said. "There's no dramatic ultimatum attached. If we reach an agreement, I will continue contributing at whatever level we formally define. If we don't, I'll complete the current transitions, wish the business well, and move on. But I'm not returning to invisible. My father looked at the page for a long time. He looked at my brother. My brother was looking at the table. My grandmother said, "Theodore, say what you need to say." He took a slow breath. He said, "You have contributed more than you've been credited for. That should have been addressed directly a long time ago." He said it in the tone of someone who has decided that honesty is less painful than the alternative, which is not the most generous form of honesty, but is sometimes the only one available. My brother said nothing for a while. Then he said, "I didn't know the addendum existed." And he said it quietly, without the defensive edge, which was the first honest thing he had said to me all week. I nodded. "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the whole problem." I left Mercer House. I left the bakery before anything could harden back into argument. In the parking lot, I sat in my car and let myself breathe without performing anything. I wasn't triumphant. I was tired in the specific way you get tired when you have been holding something up for a very long time and you finally set it down, not because someone offered to help, but because your arms gave out. The next 48 hours moved at the pace of reality, catching up with itself. My brother sent me a long text that evening. Most of it was defensive, but buried in the middle was one sentence. I think I assumed the business side just sort of handled itself. I didn't respond that night. I read it 3 times and let it settle. The hotel invoice was corrected by the end of the week, but only after the events director sent a formal inquiry to my father's email that he had to ask the bookkeeper to help him interpret. The health permit renewal was filed with 2 days to spare. The flour supplier extended the contract, but not at the favorable rate I had been maintaining because my brother hadn't known what leverage we had, and by the time he found out the window had narrowed. 2 of the catering clients sent politely concerned emails about response times. One of them, a corporate account I had personally onboarded, quietly began getting quotes from another caterer. My father didn't tell me that. The bookkeeper did because she had been watching the whole thing play out and wanted me to know. None of those losses were caused by anything I had done. They were caused by an assumption that had run unchallenged for 6 years, that the business could afford to treat its most essential function as invisible because it would keep functioning anyway. Assumptions like that have a shelf life. They just don't come with a label. 3 weeks after the family meeting, my father called and asked if I was willing to sit down with him and an accountant to discuss a formal structure. He didn't apologize again. What he said was, "I think we got the order wrong." He meant the announcement and the conversation that should have come before it, and possibly some things further back than that. I understood what he was reaching for, even if he couldn't quite reach it all the way. I said yes. We spent 2 meetings working out an arrangement that reflected what I actually did and what that was worth. It was not everything I might have wanted. It was more than I'd had before. The distinction matters less than the fact that it was named. My brother and I are not close the way siblings in movies are close, but something shifted between us in the weeks after the meeting that I think is more durable than warmth. He started asking questions, real ones, the kind that require you to admit you don't know something. He texted me when the accounting software flagged an anomaly he didn't understand. He asked what the addendum was for and actually listened to the answer. That's not an apology. It might be something more useful. My grandmother called me on a Sunday afternoon a month after all of it. She said, "I want you to know I read every page of that packet." Then she said, "Your grandfather would have recognized what you built before I had to tell him." It was the most complicated compliment I have ever received, and I think about it often. The bakery is still open. The hotel account is still there. The Instagram following is still growing, which genuinely does matter and which I have said out loud more than once because I think the visible work deserves credit too. The operational systems are more stable now because more than one person understands them. That's better for the business, and I'm honest enough to admit it, even now. I don't regret staying quiet for as long as I did. I don't regret what I did when I stopped. I regret that it took an announcement over birthday cake and pecan pie in front of 43 relatives for anyone to look directly at what had been keeping the lights on. But I've stopped waiting for that particular regret to belong to anyone else. My father thought making me tough was the same as giving me a future. The dinner taught him that those are different things. What I had built at Hartwell's didn't need his acknowledgement to be real, it just needed mine. And once I stopped pretending I hadn't built it, nothing in that room could make me invisible again. I still think about the pecan pie going cold in front of me. That's the detail that keeps coming back. Not the applause, not my father's speech about legacy, not my mother's face already turned toward my brother like a compass finding north. Just the pie. The way I didn't touch it. The way I already knew, somewhere before my brain caught up, that something had shifted permanently in that room. What happened to Hartwell's after I stopped carrying it wasn't punishment. I want to be honest about that. I didn't engineer a collapse. I just stopped standing between a set of consequences and the people who had earned them. And the thing about consequences is that they are completely indifferent to feelings. They don't care that my father meant well in some version of himself. They don't care that my brother genuinely didn't know the labor addendum existed. The flower supplier still needed a response. The hotel invoice was still wrong. The permit window was still closing. Reality doesn't pause while a family argues about who deserves credit. That's the part I had to sit with the longest. The understanding that cause and effect had been running quietly underneath everything the whole time, and the only reason nobody had noticed was because I kept intercepting it. Every time a deadline approached, I caught it. Every time a system started to slip, I steadied it. I had spent 6 years making my family feel like the business ran on charm and good intentions, because I was the thing that actually ran it, and I had made myself invisible enough that nobody questioned the gap. There's something I've come to believe about the kind of work I was doing, and it isn't comfortable to say out loud. Competence without integrity toward yourself eventually becomes its own trap. I was good at my job. I was genuinely good at it, but I had been using that competence to avoid a harder and more honest conversation about what I was worth, what I needed, what I deserved to be called in the business I was sustaining. Being useful felt safer than being visible. Useful people don't get questioned. They get counted on, which is a different thing, and I had confused the two for long enough that I had started to disappear inside the confusion. What I found on the other side of that dinner, once the initial anger burned down to something quieter, was that I had actually never stopped knowing who I was. I knew which permits needed filing, I knew what the addendum protected, I knew the numbers, the contacts, the renewal windows, the risk exposures. That knowledge wasn't taken from me when my father pointed at my brother, it was still mine. The dinner only revealed that I had been lending it to people who didn't know they were borrowing. Staying took something I hadn't expected to need as much as I did. Not courage in the dramatic sense, but the quieter, more demanding kind that asks you to keep going in the right direction even when nobody is watching and nobody is clapping. Showing up to that second family meeting with a printed document instead of a grievance. Speaking in facts when I wanted to speak in pain. Not walking away from the thing I had built just because the people around it had failed to see me building it. My grandmother read every page of that packet. She said my grandfather would have recognized what I built before she had to tell him. I've turned that sentence over many times since. I think what she meant is that real work announces itself eventually to the people honest enough to look. The rest just takes a little longer. I don't think my family became different people because of what happened. I think they became slightly more accurate ones, and I think I did too.